Hey, good evening, everybody. I thought I would continue on the Bible study that I started the other night. Bear with me. I'm not used to doing this, and had some false starts, but hopefully we can get this done. So, to start off with, I wanted to touch a little bit on the personality of John. Okay, who was John? John was an average schmo. He was a businessman. He was in partnership with Peter. They were fishermen, and they had a fishing venture together. His father was Zebedee. His mom was Salome. She was one of the women that were at Jesus' tomb, that early during resurrection. He was just an average guy, business guy, blue collar. The one thing that amazes me, if you John included, and you look at the apostles, they are definitely not who anyone would have picked, man-wise. These were not learned men. These were not scholars. These were average working people. As we're going to touch on a little bit later, they would have been looked down upon. They were probably considered uncouth, and there's several reasons why, but especially by the Pharisees. And going in a little bit, John's brother was James. They were known as the sons of thunder because they're the ones that wanted to call down thunder and lightning and brimstone on villages that rejected them. And if they were a musical group, they would be called the Zealous Brothers. Sorry, my Pastor Chuck has infected me with his corny humor. But notwithstanding, they, you look at John by the time this is written, and his whole outlook has changed. Instead of being zealous and wanting to really slam, he is talking about grace and patience and love. And I think a lot of people, if they're honest with themselves, they are not the same people when they believe in this gospel. I mean, everybody gets stagnant sometimes. I mean, if you look at my life, it's probably hard to tell if I'm any different a lot of times. I mean, I'm kind of weird and out there, and make no apologies about it. But it's once you get the gospel, you change, and you're talking about a guy who was actually intimate of Jesus, who knew Jesus, and that's not going to change you. Yeah, I think it had a profound effect on John. Moving forward here, we're going to start in John 1:15, and so I'm just going to read here. John testified about him when he shouted to the crowds, "This is the one I was talking about when I said, someone is coming after me, who is far greater than I am, for he existed long before me. From his abundance we have all received one gracious blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ. No one has seen God, but the unique one, who is himself God, is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us." Okay. The one thing that I would like to point out is in John's testimony, it is rooted in the understanding that Jesus is eternal, that Jesus is before him, that he's making way for Jesus, but Jesus is before him. John does the same thing, 1:1. A lot of this is because in antiquity, it was widely believed that chronological priority or order was significant. The firstborn was, the firstborn son was the son that inherited everything. That this idea that, if I come first, if I was there before you, then I have superiority, and that was cultural. And so this idea that both John the Baptist and John in the gospel is establishing is Jesus predates everything because he's eternal. And I think that's intentional. And if you look at verse 16, it emphasizes grace and blessings. And, from his abundance we have received one gracious blessing from another, or grace for a grace. This idea that one is coming for another, that one is taking the place of another, is what this is kind of elaborating. On a more ethereal sense, it could be, John, is pointing out that John the Baptist is being replaced by Jesus, but I think it's more significant. I think he's also much deeper. I think he's basically saying that John, this is bigger than John. This is basically the new covenant. This is the law going away, and this is being replaced by Jesus, by grace. And I think that's very significant. So we're going to read on here, and we'll continue it on. No one has seen God but the unique one, who is himself God, is near the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us. This has John's testimony when the Jewish leaders sent priests and temple assistants from Jerusalem to ask John, "Who are you?" He came right out and said, "I am not the Messiah." "Well then, who are you?" they asked. "Are you Elijah?" "No," he replied. "Are you the prophet we are expecting?" "No." "Then who are you? We need an answer for those who sent us. What do you have to say about yourself?" John replied to the words of the prophet Isaiah, "I am one voice shouting in the wilderness, clear the way for the Lord's coming." Then the Pharisees, who had been sent, asked him, "If you weren't the Messiah or Elijah or the prophet, what right do you have to baptize?" Okay. And this is, Isaiah 43, the Old Testament prophecy basically points the way to John. This idea that John has prepared the way for the Messiah with his teaching of repentance would have, the Pharisees and the religious leaders, they would have known that. And in their defense, there was a lot of false messiahs in the day. There was a lot of people that were claiming to be a Messiah, but not quite as unique. And John flat out denied that he was the Messiah. So that would have taken him aback. And why are the Pharisees so interested? Well, let's go in an overview of the three major parties of the day. The Pharisees. We'll start with the Pharisees. The Pharisees were ultra legalistic. They had a very low opinion of the common man, very low opinion of any, buddy that wasn't of an educated status. Basically, they would question, kind of like today, what's your education? Do you have a degree? Well, whose authority? I mean, how can you say this if you don't, haven't had proper training? You haven't had the proper education. And so they're probably miffed because they have nothing to do with it. They were very, very legalistic, as I said. They, will cause problems, as we'll see further on in the study. The Sadducees were very popular. The Pharisees weren't that popular with the people, but they pretty much had control. The Sadducees denied any resurrection. They denied life after death sometimes. The lens that we see them is usually negative because none of their writings or testaments have survived. So what we get is usually a hostile view of them. But they would have been the ultra liberals of the day. They would have been that. And then you have the Essenes. The Essenes were communal. They were very pacifistic. They did, in a lot of ways, they were legalistic like the Pharisees, but they were very pacifistic. They wouldn't sacrifice animals, for instance. They didn't believe in that. They basically didn't believe in wealth or riches. They would give everything away to the poor, and they set themselves aside. So that is why you won't hear about the Essenes necessarily in the New Testament. Is not that they were that insignificant, but they were just sort of isolationists. They lived in communes, as I said, and so they weren't around. And so this is kind of what system you have in place. And so we're going to come to a close here, but when you're talking about this system, the main people in play as far as the religious leaders are the Pharisees. They're the ones that have power, and they're the ones that will question everything. And so I hope this helps a little bit. As I said, I'm trying to keep these to short segments so they're easily digest, and I don't rack myself, trying to research this out. This is very different than a regular Bible study. So I'll call that quits for tonight, and I hope everybody stays safe, and God bless.